My name's Sasha Pete, and I'm joined by a fantastic individual. This man tore up the NSL and got to represent our country. None other than the great Aytek Genc. Welcome, Aytek, to this conversation.
Oh, thank you, Sasha. I'm not exactly a great, but thanks for inviting me.
Oh, pleasure, sir. So you were born overseas in Turkey, and you came over here as a young boy.
I was born in Ankara, Turkey. I came over here when I was 4 years of age and settled. And I suppose you could say I'm an Aussie. I love this country, and love being here.
So did your love for football come obviously from your parents' love for football? How did you fall in love with our great game?
No, not at all. My father didn't play the game. My mother didn't really have an interest in the game. It was funny. I do remember kicking a ball around in the streets of Ankara when I was younger, like vaguely remembering that. I remember when we came to Australia, our next door neighbour, a couple of older boys, took me down to the Maryland Soccer Club here in Sydney. I remember just getting the ball and dribbling past, 8 or 9 players just instinctively. So I don't know where it came from. It just happened.
And talk to us about your first junior club. Where did you gravitate to on the pitch?
When I was younger, I played for Maryland Soccer Club, and I played as a number 9. I was one of those young boys, reasonably quick. I scored a lot of goals. As I progressed in the game, I started moving back into a more midfield role, but that sort of happened probably at the age of about 12 or 13. So I saw myself more as a midfielder, an attacking midfielder, rather than a number 9. It's difficult up there.
Yes. And so who were some of your early influences going through the junior acts? Did you get the opportunity to be in representative sides? I hear that come under 16s, you played a little bit of indoor soccer and got to represent our country there. So what was happening as you sort of progressed through your junior ranks?
No, I was only a little kid. So, up and after probably about the age of 13, I kind of found it hard to compete with some of the older boys, when they reach that maturity. And even though I was a pretty decent footballer, when you go through that phase of not being able to compete. But look, to be honest, I didn't really represent anyone. I didn't represent New South Wales apart from indoor soccer. But I was playing for a church team at age 14, but I was playing in the under-16s comp. But I had played for, like I said, Marylands and at Blackett United under a guy named Dave Hand. So I had sort of a mild upbringing. And then I played for Busby in the Southern Districts League, but I was scoring like 35 goals a season. I was doing reasonably well. At age 16 was my first taste of representative football when I played for Southern Districts here in Sydney. I think guys like Paul Ocon, Klaus Ocon, all those guys came through that area. I know Nick Carl coaches out there now. So that was my first foray into representative football. I was fortunate enough to play for Australia at indoor soccer. But that was back in the day when we used a big tennis ball. It wasn't the futsal. Yeah. And I travelled to America, the Australian under-16 squad. And I remember there was a senior team that went with us as well. And guys like Ernie Campbell, ex-Socceroos was in that squad. So it was an honour for me to be sort of in and around those guys. There was some great indoor players back then, Erkin Osman. And it was, so it was a good vibe and a great trip. And then when I got to 17, I was playing for Bankstown. Bankstown at the time was an Australian club based out of Stacey Street. And they had their own little clubhouse. And I played 3rd grade. Back in the day, it was like 3rd grade, 2nd grade, 1st grade. So all of a sudden, I went from being this skinny young boy who found it tough to compete to a guy, I worked on my athleticism and my speed. And then I went from 3rd grade, 2nd grade to 1st grade pretty quickly. So, by the age of 17 and a half, 18, I was playing 1st grade for Bankstown.
Oh, fantastic. It's a really interesting segue because we're now speaking at a time where players are getting selected or dropped to NPL squads. And I speak to some parents who might have their, technically brilliant player, but a little bit small in stature. and there are many pathways. And so it's interesting that you got to the technical ability of playing indoor as a teenager. I think that translated to your, I remember you being really able to, once you started playing NSL, being able to nip around players and zoom around players. And I thought that was your X factor when you played. Did you feel that then you got your growth spurt and then you were, then a man later on, let's say, as opposed to some kids who get big at 15, 16 and others who get big at sort of 18 to 20?
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably an advantage to develop a little bit later, I think. And as you just said, there are guys that I remember playing against guys at age 15 and 16 who were phenomenal footballers. They were already men. They were grown. They were technical. They were strong. And then when everyone else caught up to them, they kind of thought, oh, gee, I'm not the dominant figure that I used to be. And all of a sudden went the opposite way for them. But then you look at guys like John Markovsky and, he was probably one of the best players in Australian history. And he was playing NSL, at 15 or 16 and still did the job and kicked on. I remember Paul Trimboli, who wasn't a big guy, playing NSL at a very young age as well. But it did help me because it gave me more time to get to where I wanted to get. But I'll tell you what I did work on was I knew I had the technical qualities through indoor soccer and futsal after that. But I worked on my athleticism. And I knew to make it, I had to be a good athlete. And so it wasn't just about the ball for me. It became a transition thing. It was about, movement and running and support. But I spent a lot of hours by myself at the training paddock doing 100-metre sprints, and I thought I was Carl Lewis, but so it was a bit funny. So you've got to work at every part of your game.
Yeah, brilliant. Oh, so that's fantastic words of wisdom. So you play state league football for Bankstown. So how old were you when you made your sort of state league debut, where you're playing sort of state one representative?
Yeah. Like I said, I started at age 17. I was playing third grade. That year I got moved into second grade. At 18, I was playing first grade as a regular. But then what I did was I remember Marconi at the time was obviously one of the biggest clubs in the country, and they had a really good under-19 squad. And back then you had the NSL squad and you had the under-19s, and it was kind of the place to be for every aspiring footballer. And I remember a lot of the guys I played with, there was about 9 of them were going to a Marconi trial for their youth team. And the coaches at the time were Ron Corrie, ex-Socceroos, Ron Corrie and Alan Marr. And I wasn't going to go. And I thought, I'm already playing first grade. I'm young. I thought, you know what, I'll go anyway. And I remember there was like 200 kids showed up. And they were looking for like 2 guys, right? And I've been doing a lot of training with a Romanian guy, a mentor of mine named Josip Prokop. And he's like an 80-year-old fit guy that used to line up 100 balls and make me shoot all day. Mm-hmm. I remember going to the Marconi trial, and in the first 10 minutes, I hit 2 from 30 metres that went in, luckily. Beautiful. And they just said, listen, come over here. We're going to sign you. And so I ended up signing for Marconi Youth. And that year, Des Shine Plug was the first grade coach. He brought me in to train with first grade. And, that squad was just phenomenal. I was in awe. There was Mark Yankovic, Peter Shan.
Tony
Henderson.
How quick was he?
He was so quick. Yeah, it was so quick. Tony Henderson. There was Ian Gray, Peter Tredinick, Rod Brown, David Lowe. I think Tommy McCulloch at the time had just gone to Apia. Okay. There was an incredible array of, Steve Caldron, Lee Sterry, Bruce James, Alex McPherson. So I can go on and on and on. Then I made my NSL debut that year. I remember coming on with about 15 minutes to go against Blacktown City at Marconi Stadium. And I thought, this is great. So, but then I moved on from Marconi because there was no way at my age and the type of squad they had with like 12 or 13 Socceroos, I was going to get a regular game. And I ended up signing for a club called Auburn, Uruguay. And that's when I really kicked on as a footballer.
And so and this is this is probably your story, but a lot of kids these days who you're at the precipice of making it, and then sometimes you need to realign yourself so that you can actually then flourish. So walk us through. So what was the quality like, the difference between, let's say, an under-19s regular game in the youth system of the NSL versus playing for Auburn?
Okay, so Auburn were like the equivalent of NPL 1 at the time.
Okay. Yeah.
So I knew I had to go down to get the regular game. And I talk about investing in yourself. A lot of guys nowadays, they want to sort of hang around a club hoping that they might get a chance. Whereas I read it and I went, look, they've got these midfielders there at Marconi at their peak. I need to play and to be a better footballer. And I thought the youth competition back then was really strong. I mean, the AIS, the Institute of Sport at the time had virtually, that was the young Socceroos. John Kosh, and they had Paul Foster and Jason Pollack, and it was just a great generation. I think that might have been the squad that went to Russia, I think, for the World Youth Championship. So, but I did really well with the youth team at Marconi. I was scoring some goals from midfield and so on. But I knew I had to go. I found the NPL, or the state league at the time, was very physical. And it became, you're playing with these older guys that have been around a little bit. You cop a few knocks, but it really, makes you a man, right? You're starting to. But one thing I always try to do is always back myself, and I was always encouraged to take players on. And nowadays, a lot of it's poor circulation, retain possession, but back then it was like you've got to go and beat players and make a difference. And so I had a few good years there, and had some good coaches, and particularly Raul Blanco, who saw something in me. And because that club became Uruguay Penrith, and then we started recruiting all these NSL players, John Bradley, John McKee, there was Ian Hunter, Brett Woods, a lot of other guys that played for us were super footballers, Washington Gonzalez. So all those guys are actually playing. I remember even in the state league back then, we were playing against Blacktown City, who just recruited Zarko Ajarko on a massive contract and a transfer fee. And Les Scheinfeld was coaching Blacktown then as well. So, it wasn't like today where you got the A-League and there's a bit of a step down. So, but that was a great experience for me.
And so Washington Gonzalez, would he have to be one of the most talented? I mean, so from memory, I think he represented the Uruguay at the World Cup. So he's like this quality player, and defender, but very, very intelligent. Was he one of the sort of the strongest teammates that you had in your playing journey? Yeah,
look, he was a super player, and he played at the back like a libero. He injected himself. He had right and left foot passing range. In fact, both of us went from Uruguay Penrith and got signed by Malaysia Eagles.
Yes,
who were probably the best state league team at the time, and we won the championship, and then we became an NSL club. I remember when we moved to Malaysia and we won the championship, he was phenomenal, along with a lot of other guys. Guys like Greg Brown was there as well, and a lot of guys that did well in the NSL. But when we got to the NSL with Malaysia, I remember playing my debut against Adelaide City at Hindmarsh.
Yep.
And if you dig out the videos, you'll see Washington Gonzalez smash a free kick from like 50 metres over the head of Robert Zabika with his right foot, and then did virtually the same, but didn't score, but almost did with his left foot. So picture 2 free kicks coming in from just past the halfway line from both ends, and that was his quality. So, but look, I played with some great players. I mean, I was in a few Socceroos squads, Milan Ivanovic and, all those guys, the Trimbolis and Wadey and Nicky P and, so I was fortunate, yeah.
That would have been a good feeling, winning a championship with Malaysia in the state league, and then progressing. And now you sort of come full circle. The gamble that you paid and investing in yourself and going back down. Now you're lining up where you want to be. So walk us through that feeling of winning that championship, and then the next year sort of competing against, some of the great names of the NSL.
Yeah, no, that was phenomenal. I think Raul Blanco assembled a really good state league team. I remember the team that was our main rival at the time was Canberra, Croatia, and they had a lot of really good players, and we got past them. We moved into the NSL, and I was happy. I mean, that was the dream, right? And you've got to go backwards to go forward sometimes. And all of a sudden, there was a real excitement around the club. The crowds got bigger, and the Maltese club that represent Malaysia, they represent the Maltese population, were passionate, and they get their rattlers out, and it was kind of like the atmosphere at the game could be intimidating for the opposition teams. And we always had a great record against the really good sides like South Melbourne. Like South Melbourne used to come to Malaysia Stadium and really struggle, despite the fact they were a phenomenal side. And then it became travelling around Australia, playing in different locations. Unfortunately, the grounds that we used to play at aren't as good as what they are nowadays. I remember going to play Preston, Macedonia at
Connor Reserve.
Reserve, and I was like, wow. And then we'd play at Summers Street against Melbourne Knights, and But I love playing against South Melbourne. That was Middle Park, then Bob James Stadium, and that was a real buzz.
Yeah, it's interesting because a number of teams would be training on the same pitch where the game day was playing. So you probably say the goalkeeper area would have been sort of completely mowed down, mud pits, and I can imagine some passionate rivalries. So how long did Blanco have the Melita job for? So you were there for a number of years.
Yeah, I was there for about 5 years, I think. Raul had the squad, I think, in 1989 and 1990, 91. I think he was there for about 3 years, but he'd been there previously anyway, very successfully. And, he really established that club as an NSL force. And, he built a team that we won the NSL Cup.
Yes.
We made the top 5 one year and lost in a penalty shootout against Marconi, a game that we were leading 3-2 in extra time with not long to go, and somehow they managed to get the 3-3. We lost the penalty shootout, so we had some success, and he recruited Marshall Soper. Like I said, it was Marshall Soper and Greg Brown at the time were phenomenal. Washington Gonzalez and Gus Cerro emerged as a footballer, and Jimenez and Barrios and Lenny Vile, and we had a really good team. But then Raul went to West Adelaide, and Raleigh Rassi took over, and he had us flying there in that first year.
Yeah. So, I mean, having spoken to Raleigh, and so I think Jerry Gomez also played in that squad. He was sort of recruited. So what I admire about Melita Eagles, or what they did is, and what people don't understand is, you guys amassed a very good squad with a fraction of the budget of the likes of what a South Melbourne or Marconi pay, right? So, whereas, it's very easy. It's sort of like what a Leicester City did when they won their championship, or like what Central Coast is doing now today of getting up the ladder with probably a fraction of the budget, even in salary cap league. I mean, there was no salary cap, but I would imagine that Marconi's budget would be a multiple, and maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 6x of what Melita's budget would be. But both Raul and Raleigh would go and find players and put some belief in the system and the team. He mentioned, talk to me, because I want to understand from a player's perspective. He talks about like player psychology and how he sort of got you up for games. What were some of the tactics that Raleigh would try to do to get the team up?
Yeah, I think he was a great motivator, Raleigh, and I remember my first conversation with Raleigh were around, his belief that I was a good player, right? That's the first thing you want to hear as a footballer, that he wants you. And Raleigh loved dynamic footballers. He loved to attack. He was the guy that gave you confidence. And we had a sports psychologist there at the time, and we had some revolutionary ways of doing things. We'd meditate before we went out on the field and things like that. So, but he was also very good at spotting talent. I remember he bought Chichi Mendes from Marquee for $1,000 at the time. Yes. The guy was worth $100,000, right? But and that was great business. I know that Rowley really progressed the career of guys like Michael Redder and a lot of young guys coming through the ranks. So, no, that was great. And that's what that Rowley put together. He brought in some experienced guys. Like Peter Catholis came in. I mean, Jerry Gomez was already there. He's a great player. David Lowe came in, and Dave Reza. There's a lot of guys that have been around a while, and he had all these young guys as well coming through the ranks, the Chichis and the Redders and so on. So it was a good vibe around the club.
Yeah, and obviously you got to hear about the '74 World Cup campaign a lot. Pre-game, you would have heard a lot of about those exploits. So fantastic, and that's what I remember. Your time really tearing it up there. From memory, just sort of behind the striker or the strikers, you'd be playing in that pocket. Walk me through. So you moved across to Sydney, Croatia, but then you also were doing time in overseas. So how did that? Walk us through how that sort of worked, and did you also get offers to go elsewhere?
So I mean, we had it was funny. The period from the time I was there with Rowley at Melita, and then I actually wanted to leave. And back then we had the transfer system. Well, I think it was pre-Bosman, and it was very difficult for players to leave clubs without a club paying a transfer fee. In the end, another ex-coach of mine named Raul Carrizo, who was a great player in his day, got a coaching job in Malaysia with a team called Johor, and he wanted me to go there. And in the end, Johor paid about a $30,000 transfer fee to Melita. And I ended up signing over there. Before that, when I was in a few Socceroos squads, I was due to go to Turkey to a club called Trabzonspor. They're one of the big clubs. On 2 occasions, and this is probably fate, in Socceroo camp, I had patella tendonitis, which put me out for 9 months, so that I couldn't go the first time. And then I was in another camp in the Four Nations series where I had a cartilage operation, so I couldn't go again. So as fate would have it, my destination became Malaysia rather than Turkey. But look, that was good. I loved Malaysia. And then I started playing for Johor in Malaysia and playing for Sydney United. Yeah. And I was playing like 50 games a year. It was crazy. For about 5 years there, it was like Johor, Sydney United, Johor, Sydney United. And then I came back and settled at Sydney United in. So walk us through. So what months would you be in Malaysia? Because it's stinking hot there. So were we playing winter or summer soccer at that time? And so they'd start late February, March, and they'd go to about October. And then I'd come straight back and get straight into the NSL season.
Okay, so we were playing summer football at that time. So over the summer months.
It just kind of worked out that way. It was a pretty unusual way to do things. But that was at my insistence because I was on a full-time contract with Malaysia over multiple years. But I wanted to play a bit more NSL. And I found there was a massive contrast in styles between the two countries.
Yes.
And over in Malaysia, it was all, given the South American influence of Raul Carrizo, it was a very smart, street-smart coach. We always had bodies around the ball. Nobody was within, more than 10 metres from each other. And, we'd always drop back to the halfway line and nobody would ever press high up the park. And, that sort of way of playing style was not replicated here. In Australia, it was like, it was just press and go.
Yeah.
It was more
It was
direct.
a 1v1 and sort of probably a little bit more direct football.
Yeah. There's a bit more physical here as well, like the physicality of the players, more direct, a lot of running, whereas over there, there's a lot of possession-based football, very tactical. Yeah.
So the Johor, they've got some fanatical support. I mean, so like I know you might be in front of 3, 5, 10, maybe in a big game 15 or 20,000 supporters here in Australia, but in Malaysia they go nuts. So talk to me about what the average crowd size would be.
Okay, the club that I went to at the time didn't have massive crowds. They're an emerging club, but clubs like Selangor and Pahang and so on, like Selangor would get 80,000.
Yeah.
And, I remember playing games out at a place called Kelantan where, it was packed and, so it kind of varied. But there's some big clubs over there. They're full-time professional. I remember at the time Singapore national team was playing in the Malaysian league and Abbas Saad was there.
Yeah.
And Alistair Edwards was playing at Selangor at the time. And they used to pack it out, 40, 50,000 every game. So it really was dependent on who you played for.
Okay, got it. So in those bigger games, could you hear yourself or your teammates on the pitch, or is it more like hand signals and or you're screaming to be heard?
Yeah, no, it depends on the game. I mean, a lot of time when there's a lot of noise, it's just you play instinctively, like it's when you call for the ball, it's a bit of a, rather than, having to communicate all the time. But look, the game back in the 90s in Malaysia was probably the golden age of Malaysian football. Alan Davidson was there, and they used to import a lot of great foreign players, and there was a real flavour for the Australians, and there was opportunities for Aussie players over there. So I think Mickey Peterson played at Pahang, and Jose Uriarte, I remember him. He played for West.
Yeah, I think Joe Coletta went there. There's a bunch
was at Perak, Marshall Soper, David Miller.
There's a bunch of Aussies went there.
Yeah, it was Peter Ricoy, Ernie Tapai, played in Singapore. It was just it was good. Yeah.
And it's really now your first taste of full-time professional football, because that's all you did, as opposed to doing a job in the day and then sort of rocking up to training. Maybe. I mean, as an NSL team, so 3-4 times a week training, part-time, you're there as a full-time.
When I went to Sydney United, Branko Chelina under Branko, it was virtually full-time. Okay. It was all the players were full-time. And, we'd train 2 or 3 mornings inside the stadium, and then you'd train in the afternoon. And so it really started to come on a little bit in terms of the professionalism. And Branko was always there, and I remember a lot of the training sessions there at Sydney United were very tough. So
very also. So you come across some exceptional coaches in the Australian ranks. So you've got Raul Blanco, Raleigh Rasic, and Branko Kalina. 3 totally different styles of coach, right? So, but all sort of first class. So, where did you resonate to? Like, who are the coaches that you resonated to in terms of their sort of communication style or their mannerism?
Yeah, I thought they're all great coaches. Branko's was demanding, high tempo. He had at his disposal some of the best young talent in Australia. And he was a perfect man to nurture that talent. So I really enjoyed playing under Branko. But I only played under Branko when I got to 30 years of age. So when I joined Sydney United, I was already 30 or 29, 30. So I remember that squad, they're all like the next golden generation of footballers coming through. You had Zelko Kalats, Tony Popovic, Robbie Ennis, Rob Trajkovski and Kutbasak and Babic and Bjelokovic and Zrilic and Milicic and Marisic. I could go on and on, right?
Yes.
So Moric was there. And I was the older guy. So me and Kutbasak were the 2 oldest, right?
Okay.
It was like a different time for me. But I spent most of my career with South Americans, So from my time at Auburn, Uruguay, to my time in Malaysia with Raul Carrizo, Raul Blanco. So that kind of style suited the way I played. It was, you always had quick combination play, take players on.
Yes.
There was always a bit of individual flair.
Yes.
And, we were encouraged to express ourselves, and they had a different mindset. So they'd play different systems and so on. And, we could have another 3-hour conversation about that. But, I really enjoyed it. But I played under Ron Smith as well. So when Raul Carrizo left Johor, Ron Smith took over.
Okay.
And, so he was my coach for a year. And I really enjoyed that as well. And I think he's phenomenal.
Because the Smith sort of takes the academic sort of like modeling of how goals are scored and his body of work on, how goals are scored and applying that into practical circumstances. That's like,
he was great. He was attack minded. He was a coach who really made you think about the game and the way you receive the ball, how to play through lines, creating extra men. There was so much to, what he implemented. But, you learn from every coach. I thought every coach I had, I learned a lot from. Some of them probably do more for you in terms of your career. But I really loved kind of like that South American style.
Got it. And so so I want to circle back to the coach that probably pushed you along the most from what I heard. So it was Raul Blanco. You got an opportunity to be in a number of Socceroo camps, and I think that's just an honour in itself. Regardless of whether you play one game for our country or 100, right? It's just being selected. And you've made it now to the pinnacle of the profession that you've chosen to play. What was that like with Raul? What did he do for you to sort of get your name out there, or sort of try and push for selection, or help you get into those camps?
Well, there's no doubt he pushed my name forward. I know he was spoke to Eddie Thompson a lot, but what I did do is I performed in games when Eddie Thompson was watching. So there were some key games where Raul may have said to him, "Listen, you need to watch this."
Look at him. Yeah,
and I actually did well in those games, so that
got it.
Wish it a lot of me. And I know Lee Scheifele had known me from the Marconi days. And, look, there's a lot of guys who probably didn't play for Australia, probably deserved to. And it was an honour for me. But certainly Raul was the biggest influence in that. And I got to play under Eddie Thompson. And I remember in camp, there'd be Mick Hickman and, there'd always be people there. And I was in Terry Venables' squad in 97.
Yeah.
It's a great honour, but probably a bit unfortunate for me was that there was a generation of attacking midfielders at the time. If you look at it, there was Aurelio Vidmar that I was competing with. There was Ernie Tapai, who played 55 times. There was the emergence of Steve Corica and Damien Morey, right? So, you've got a great generation of players that you're trying to get more games from, and back then I don't think we played as many internationals as they do now. Now that we're going through Asia, there seems to be more games. So you probably got cooler players and larger.
And they tend to rotate the squad a little bit more, right? So they'll have a sort of the Aussie-based squad and a foreigners sort of contingent. So you got to were you part of that game where we played Milan? So where I think we had they came out for a couple of games, so one in Sydney and one in Melbourne. Were you part of that squad?
Yeah, well, I played in the game in Melbourne.
What a shambles of a game! So I was at that game.
I know the game got shortened.
Yeah, they cut it because apparently they had to go on a flight or something. So you played in the Melbourne game, right? So I heard that from the Sydney game that the kit man, after whoever the boys swapped their tops in the game in Sydney, you had to go back and ask for your tops because they needed to wash them for the Melbourne game because there weren't two kits. There was only one kit for the series. So you didn't obviously give your kit away in game one?
No. So what happened was in game one, the game was in Sydney. It was a sellout at the Sydney Football Stadium. And I remember we were staying at the Novotel in Brighton Le Sands, and we had lunch, and Eddie Thompson had the whiteboard, and he put the lineup out, and I was in the lineup. So I was going to play in the Sydney game, and I told my whole family that I was starting, and I was, because I was in the starting lineup. I went for a walk along the beach, and I just felt sick from lunch, and I started to vomit. And then, and I remember I got injections, and I fell asleep, and I actually didn't play in the Sydney games. That's why I played in the Melbourne game. Given the fact that I'm a Sydney boy, it made sense for me to play in Sydney. So Damien Morey replaced me in the Sydney game, and I played the next night. But as far as those jerseys are concerned, that was just the weirdest thing. Obviously, after the second game at Princes Park, I wanted to swap jerseys with one of the AC Milan players. Everyone did.
Yes.
And then the management came in and said, "Give us all your jerseys. We'll give it to the AC Milan players, and then we'll get their jerseys and give it to you." Well, those Socceroos jerseys have disappeared forever. So all our jerseys and kit, we haven't got.
Okay.
I don't know where they went.
Yeah. So I heard some of the boys ended up swapping tops with some.
Well, they may have done it individually. There was a whole bunch of us that
missed out.
Yeah. Okay. So I still don't have my jersey, nor do I have
anyone else's.
So I've got none of that. Because at the time we wore the that lime green fluoro.
Yes.
I think made the sponsor was Coca-Cola on the front.
Yes. So the and sort of that story typifies probably how football governance was happening at football at the time. You've got quality players, but you can't have enough kits. You can't even swap your tops. All that it just sort of sums up where football governance was, administration was at the time. They're trying to do the right thing. They pull the best club at the time in the world to play a game in Australia, and the fans responded. So plenty of people went and watched. But yeah, you have to cut the game short. You haven't got two sets of jerseys to swap and all.
It was crazy, now then the collective bargaining agreement came in, and the PFA's emergence, and all of a sudden the rights of footballers were looked after. Then Bosman ruling, and so it's kind of like the wrong era for a lot of players, right? So they're more well looked after now.
Yeah. So that was a time where those camps was it under Venables. A number of the boys stood up. The vast majority of the players sort of said, "Listen, whatever we're getting paid to represent our country, it's really, it was a pittance. It wouldn't cover your daily wage, if you're working outside." I mean, I know a number of the players were professional. You don't do it for money per se when you represent your country, but I think going back, that in the years before, it'd be $100, $200, $300 to represent your country. It's really, so it doesn't even cover your day. If that
it was just an honour at the time. It wasn't about the money. It was about the achievement. The money part of it sort of comes into play later on in your career. But not at the time, not with the Socceroos squad. But certainly, you had a really good bunch of players that were severely underpaid because of the nature of what was happening in the game in this country.
And so you look back on your career, you've been very, very loyal to a few clubs. So you had that sort of Urban Uruguay, Penrith Uruguay sort of affiliation, then Melita Eagles, Johor, and Sydney Croatia or Sydney United. So call it three I would call big clubs, Johor, Parramatta, and Sydney Croatia. Where does your heartstring sort of pull to when you think back now, sort of as you're middle-aged, about your football career? Where does the sort of the memories go back?
I kind of felt like underachieved as a footballer. I think I could have done more.
Okay.
I don't know why. Maybe even Raleigh Rassick used to say to me, "You don't set your standards high enough." That's what he used to say to me, even though I was a serious footballer. I think he wanted to see more. Having said that, all three, in all honesty, I can't differentiate. Melita Eagles gave me that opportunity, so I've got a real affinity to that club. I mean, Sydney United with the Croatian community, they looked after me a lot, and I worked for that club post-career as well.
Okay.
And, so they were good people and very honest people. They tell it like it is, and they set very high standards as well. And Johor, what they did for me, not many people would understand. I remember when I signed for them in '94, I flew back after about 3 weeks and got married. And me and my wife went back there. And when we got there, they had a wedding reception for us. And there was 500 people at the Pan Pacific Hotel in Johor Bahru, where I didn't even know. It was like a surprise wedding reception. So we walked in, and it was like a surprise. There was 500 people in a room at their expense. Wow. So the things they did for me, my wife would travel with the team. She was the only person that would travel all over the country to all the games and have her own hotel room. And, it was just, don't know why that was. I think.
Well, you almost treated like, sporting royalty.
It was great. I remember, meeting the king at the time, and, he was a prince at the time. He's become the king. And, so, over there, it's different. So you can understand that I've also got a close relationship with people over there. Then I started helping some of the boys get over there and play and so on. So, I can't tell you who my heart's with, because it's with all three. And, I spent like 5 years at each club. And I wasn't the type of guy that would move. Like, I remember there was interest from Heidelberg and Adelaide City and all these clubs. But, I'm fairly loyal to a club. If I'm happy, I like to stay. Yeah.
Okay, so so later on in your career, so the Sydney Croatia derbies that you would be playing in Sydney, which are the big games that you remember? You think, okay, now it's going to be on, the crowd's going to be on, and there's going to be ample supporters from both sides. Which are the clubs that really brought it?
Well, every time we played Marconi, it was a war. It was usually Marconi and Sydney Olympic. It was always a physical contest against Marconi. For some reason, the two clubs didn't like each other. They were literally up the road from each other. But I remember playing games where it got a bit ugly. They had a great side, Andy Harper and Francis Awaratifi and, John Paul Di Marini and all those guys were playing. Yeah. So it became a real rivalry. The other one was Sydney Olympic. The Sydney United Sports Centre would be packed out. It would just be packed, and they were always really good games. And the other one was Northern Spirit, who'd come on the scene, and they were getting really big crowds. And I remember we played them at the Sydney United Sports Centre, and it was just packed. And we beat them 3-1, and the place was just buzzing, And they had this star-studded lineup, and I think Graham Arnold was player coach, and Robbie Slater was playing at the time, and I think Craig Foster had joined the club, and it was like the who's who of football. And so look, in Sydney, like in Melbourne, there's always that rivalry. It's like the South Melbourne Heidelberg and so on, which is phenomenal. But particularly Marconi, that was it was kind of like a bit of hate there. Yeah, and so you
just know, like, there's a little bit of sting. Maybe it's what's said in the newspapers the day before or the day after the game, and just you feel it on the pitch. What about traveling? Who did you room with? Let's say in your time with Melita, did you have a steady roomie, or did you swap it around?
Yeah, no. When I was at Melita, Raul Blanco always used to put me with Craig Mason. Remember Craig Mason?
No,
Craig Mason was just this great player, hard man, played at Marconi, played at Newcastle and so on. And, he would have been like 34 and I was young, and for some reason he wanted me to room with him, and he'd always just say to me, use your pace. He'd give me advice. But look, I roomed with a few other guys. I remember rooming a lot with a guy named Brett Hughes, the goalkeeper. And I remember in Socceroos squads, a room with Ian Gray, a room with Matt Bingley, who, by the way, never slept. You know, like we'd be playing a game the next day. I think we had an international game against New Zealand in Melbourne under Venables, and Bingley was my roommate night before the game. Seriously, he was on the phone at 4 a.m. in the morning. I'm like,
because he was nervous, or so could you get to sleep?
I didn't sleep at all. He was on the phone. You know what I mean? So, you know, you've got to pick the right guy to room. I room with Mark Babbage. I've roomed with various other things. You just got to make sure you got the right guy. Otherwise, you'll never sleep. You know?
Yeah, somebody's on the phone for all night because they can't sleep because they're probably nervous.
Yeah.
Then you can't sleep. There's okay. So who are the that you're talking about at Sydney United team? So you're talking about the likes of coming through the Kalats, Popovic. Did you see glimpses of brilliance in there that they were going to go on to bigger and better things even when they were younger?
Yeah. Like I said, there was just this generation of players that Sydney United produced. They came through the ranks, and as I said, from Spider at the back, right through to. I think Popper at the time, Popovic signed overseas, so he sort of played the first. He played in 95, 96, played in 96, 97. So they're the 2 years I was there. But after about 8 or 9 games, he went overseas. So
yes.
Then Robbie Ennis sort of slotted back into a more defensive role. But physically, it was a good side, quick side. And we had 3 guys that were on fire. David Zrulich up front, I think, won the Golden Boot.
Yep.
Ante Milicic was on fire at the time, and Kresimir Maricic had signed for Melbourne Knights. And he was kind of like the missing link at the time.
He was quality. So Kresh was, what a player.
Well, his strength was the fact that he played in that number 10 role. I got pushed out more to the left.
Okay.
So he had this strength about him that he'd be under pressure and he'd be able to turn both sides and just, knock a diagonal ball into the path of the 2 strikers. And, that 96, 97 Sydney United team was probably one of the best of all time, in my opinion, purely because of the youth, because of the way that we played. Unfortunately, we won the minor premiership. Unfortunately, we lost that grand final in Brisbane in front of 42,000.
Yes.
And that was crazy. That was, so that was another story.
I think that on paper, if the game was played on paper, you'd win 3-0. But unlucky for the Sydney Croatia fans and players, the Brisbane side put up an epic performance. I watched that game 6 or 12 months ago again, and what an absolute great game of football. Level of intensity and build up.
But we didn't play well. Compared to what we were capable of, it was probably one of our worst games that we had for a while. When we got there, it all started because they got an away goal in the 2-legged semi, and that gave them the home ground advantage. It would have been played in Sydney, that grand final. I think we would have won that game.
Okay.
But when it went up there, and I remember walking on the field, I remember the bus, going into the stadium, and it was like a state of origin type hostile reception we got. I remember we went out for the warm-up on a bumpy pitch, and the boos were just like, you could feel the hate. And then, you know what? They had nothing to lose. They had some experienced old heads. Frank Freeman was there, Rod Brown, Alan Hunter. There was a few comments made in the newspapers beforehand about how we were going to win. And, what I mean? Like, they were playing that underdog sort of tag, and it kind of went pear-shaped for us.
Yeah. So, the ecstasy of winning a championship, let's say at Melita, going into the NSL, that's what football's about. And then the sort of the bitterness of losing one, as a footballer, you experience all those things. You've had, your injuries, setbacks, and it's all sort of part of the journey. After you finish playing, you go on to coaching a number of clubs and having a number of roles with, you've been a TD, you've been an assistant coach at the highest level, you've coached your own teams outright and won championships. Talk to me now that, you're speaking to that 16, 17, 18-year-old boy or girl. What advice do you have for their game when they ask you?
Firstly, you've got to love the game, right? And you've got to want to play. And I think a lot of the young players nowadays are in a hurry. It's like, if they're not playing A-League or not playing NPL1 first grade, by the time they're 17 or 18, they think the world's going to end. And it's not. And, I'm a classic example of that. And we've got some incredibly talented footballers in this country who could do far more than they're doing if they just believe and give themselves time to develop and work on their deficiencies. And I think that's very, very important. I don't think enough of them do that. And so, you look at, and I remember there was a guy named Anthony Surgeon who played for Marconi, played NSL with Wollongong. He sort of went back into a state league environment, came back and became a phenomenal footballer, right? So you've got to just believe in yourself and work hard. And, if you're not a great athlete, work on your athleticism. If you're not a great technician, work on that. So, and believe.
And how important is it picking the right level? Because that transition from sort of fringe football to first 11 football, sometimes it can be a small gap, sometimes it can be vast. So picking the right level in a system or coach, how important is it finding the right environment? Or do you believe that it's about just working on yourself and the opportunities will present itself?
Yeah, I think you need to work on yourself and then try and get into an environment that's going to help your football. And for me, it's all about game time. You need to play, and you need to, whether you're playing NPL1, NPL2, whether you're playing A-League or W League, or now it's A-League Women's, just keep investing in yourself and play. I think a lot of guys are happy to be in an environment where, I'm at a good club and I'm not getting game time, or, I'm not getting the opportunities. You've just got to take the risk. And, I'll tell you what people look at. They look at what you've done. Like, if you're a striker and you played NPL2 or NPL1 and you score 20, people are going to look at you.
Yes.
But if you're a fringe player and you're not on the field, well, you're just a fringe player. And so I think people are starting to realise that more and more. And you see a lot of good players playing NPL now. And there's not a great difference between the A-League teams and some of the top NPL teams. But most importantly, love the game and play for as long as you can. Because one thing I did realise, that I realise now that there's nothing better than playing football.
Yes.
You don't deal with the politics, you don't deal with a lot of other things in the game, administratively and, dealing with things that you never thought of as a footballer. And it keeps you healthy. So just keep playing.
Fantastic words of wisdom. Aytek, thank you so much for your contribution to Australian football. We remember you fondly and we wish you all the very best.
Well, thank you very much, Sasha. See you later.
Hey guys, we've come to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to our wonderful guest. If you like this type of content and would like to see more, how about you hit the like and subscribe button? And have a fantastic day.